that time is of paramount importance. Welcome to the Friday webinar series. Today we are very fortunate to have Professor Akhil Gupta from UCLA, whom I have known from his Stanford days. And today also our chairman, Dr. Arvind Virmani, has agreed to chair the session. So without any ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Arvind Virmani.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Let me very briefly and quickly introduce, and then we can go into the talk. So, Professor Akhil Gupta is the professor in the Department of Anthropology and Director, Center for India and South Asia, University of California, Los Angeles. Actually, that raises memories. I was very close to LA. I did my engineering in Pasadena, which is in the same general area. Anyway, he is also the president, currently the president of the American Anthropological Association. He is the author of several books, Post-Colonial Developments, editor of Culture, Power, Place, and Anthropological Locations. I guess we are not familiar with anthropology, but yes, that'll be interesting. His book, Red Tape, was awarded the Kumaraswamy Prize by the Association of Asian Studies. Recent publications include The Promise of Infrastructure and the Anthropology of Corruption. He is currently finishing a book manuscript with Purnima Mankekar on BPOs and call centers entitled Future Tense. With that, let me hand it over to Professor Gupta.
Thank you, Dr. Virmani, and thank you, Dr. Charan Singh, for inviting me to give this presentation. This is, as you can tell, a presentation that is coming out of the forthcoming book. And basically what I'll present to you today is the last chapter of the book, which is the epilogue. So here's what I plan to do today. I will first talk about the impact of COVID-19 on BPOs. Then I'll talk about the future. So much of my talk will be concerned with the question of future and futures. First, it'll be about the future of BPO workers, then the future of BPOs as organizations or as an industry. And finally, I'll speak to a much larger issue, which is the future of global capitalism itself and what studying the BPO industry tells us about the future of global capitalism. So here is very quickly outline for the book itself. It has 6 chapters. The introduction to the book raises the issue of temporality and futures. Then there's a chapter on the body, which is called the missed period. There's a chapter about work relations and intimacies at work. There's a chapter on shopping malls as basically pedagogical spaces for BPO work. And there's a chapter on mobility and the various types of mobilities that BPO work represents. So people are basically engaged in forms of virtual migration when they do BPO work because they're talking to people usually in the global north. And but they're also engaged in other types of mobility, which is that they're often migrate from second or third tier cities or small towns to metropolitan centers, but they're also experiencing class mobility. So mobility in multiple senses. And the last chapter, which I'm going to present to you today, is the epilogue. Okay, so why focus on futures? Now, the future, it turned out, was not something that we started out doing the project in thinking about, but it soon imposed itself as a central aspect of our research. Sorry, I went. So, and And one of the reasons why this was true was because most of the workers, as you know, BPOs are very young, below 25 years of age. And they themselves brought up the future in our conversations with them. So it was a central concern to them. What were they going to do in the future? How did they see their future? This was something that was of central importance to them, to the workers themselves. And it came up without any provocation on our part. So we didn't have to actually ask them about the future. They told us what their plans were, what their ideas were, what their aspirations were, what their fears were about the future. And this speaks more generally to a topic that I can talk about in Q&A, which has to do with the role of the future in social science in a way in which we think about social sciences. So the argument that I will make is that we in the social sciences have not tended to pay as much attention to the future as to the past. We have, departments of history and so forth, but we have no departments of the future in in the academic world and elsewhere. And this is a very important, sociologically, it's a very important aspect of our lives that affects what we do in the present, which we tend to not pay attention to. Um, Now, the future of BPOs was, of course, as institutions, as organizations, was, of course, embedded in future trajectories of the nation, by which I mean development trajectories of the nation. So it depended very much, for example, BPO work depended very much on, for example, on a wage differential between the wages that were paid to people in first world, global north settings, and wages that are paid to people in India and the Philippines and places like that. But of course, once you get a trajectory of development in which wages rise in the global south, then the question becomes, well, what is the future of this industry going to look like? Um, and more generally, it's about, of course, the future of global capitalism, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So if we are going to see, for example, the growing importance to technology, the displacement of workers by technologies of various kinds as a trend in global capitalism, then what is that going to do to this industry? So that's the questions that are embedded in that second, point here. And then finally, the question of why am I speaking of futures rather than the future as a singular thing? And here again, I think it's very important to keep the sense that the future is open, that there are multiple possibilities, always multiple possibilities inherent in the present, and that those possibilities come about because of actions in the present. So because of policies or decisions that are taken in the present by governments, by individuals, by companies, the futures might actually differ from what we think it is going to be, or there are multiple possible trajectories that could happen, right? So that's why we focus on multiple futures. I should explain the other part of my title, Affective Capitalism. Okay, so why do we speak about affective capitalism? This is work that I'm doing with Purnima Mankekar, my colleague. So we speak about affective capitalism because affective, what does it mean? Affective basically denotes that which pertains to affects or emotions. In the literature, there is a distinction made between affect and emotion, but I'm going to kind of flatten that distinction a little bit here and just talk about affective as all activity that pertains to affects or emotions, right? Now, obviously, From the study of manufacturing and the study of goods, we know that emotions or affects play a very small role in that kind of production, right? But when we move to services, affect starts to play a more important role, right? So, for example, when you go and visit a doctor, you want, of course, of someone who's very competent in medicine, but you also want somebody who has a good bedside manner, who can explain things to you, who listens to you, etc. Right? So you are looking for in services. You're always connected through affect, through emotion to the service provider, whether it's the doctor or the hair cutter or whatever it is, through various, and that relationship might be very intimate or it might be less intimate. So you could be talking to an accountant or a banker, and it may not be a very intimate relationship, but there's always some involvement of emotional affect in that interaction, right? Now, call centers are businesses that actually uh, depend on affect, right? So their main business is to regulate emotion, is to, so what call centers are doing is really they are taking care of the emotions of the customers, right? That's their main purpose. Of course, they book tickets for you, they book you hotel rooms, they'll do provide you with, your password if you forget it, etc. But the most important thing that they are doing is that they are making you as a customer happy with the company that they are working for, right? They are telling you that you're a valuable customer. They are protecting the brand image of the company. They're making sure that you as the customer are not angry at the company or feel that the company has let you down, that you trust the company. So that's the most important work that call centers are doing, right? And very often what they're doing is they are providing a service for companies that are providing you services. So they are basically managing your emotions about the services that the company is providing you, right? So affective capitalism, basically what it means is that we are using that term to talk about how regulating and managing the emotions of customers is useful in generating profits, right? So when you have a doctor who is providing you a service, that is not affective capitalism because that's basically one person, right? But when you have a whole corporation of, say a hospital in which that doctor is employed, and the hospital then becomes concerned that, of course, you need to have good bedside manners. How do we encourage the doctor to improve their bedside manners, etc., because it affects our bottom line, right? So then you have to start talking about affective capitalism. Now, our argument is that it's a well-known and old feature of well-recognized feature of capitalism, that capitalism expands geographically, it expands into new domains in order to generate profits. Uh, and the idea is that affective capitalism is represents the expansion of capitalism in a previously unmonetized domain, namely the emotional and the side of you that cares for other people, that cares for a brand, that cares for products, etc. Right? So affective capitalism represents the expansion of capitalism into this domain in the sense that areas of life that were not necessarily monetized have now become monetized and profit generating. And you can see this in, if you think about, of course, if you think about things like Facebook and WhatsApp, you can see this very clearly, right? That this is monetizing the domain of social relationships, of your connection to your loved ones, etc. That this is basically what these companies are doing. But if you think about even companies like Amazon or Flipkart or whatever, um, they're not just logistics companies and they're not just retail companies. They're little more than that. And the little more, and the reason why they took off, I think, is because of this affective dimension. You can go to these companies' websites and you can get other people's responses to that product, etc. Right? So basically, the kind of stuff that you would have gone to a friend for to say, "Oh, what should I buy? I'm thinking of buying a TV. What brand should I get?" You now go to the reviews on these websites, and it's basically like having thousands of friends helping you out, right? Now, from a completely, maximizing individual perspective, there's no reason why anybody should post a review because they're not getting anything out of it. They're not getting paid for it, etc. But it's using our social uh, goodwill, basically, to generate profits. And that's what we call affective capitalism, right? It's using the fact that as a social person, I want to help other people. I feel like I'm doing something good by helping other people. And it's using that emotion to generate profits for the company. Right? Okay, so now, just to give you a sense of where we did the work and what the work consists of, we studied 3 companies in Bangalore for 6 years, from 2009 to 2016. We followed about 40 people over this time, people who worked in call centers as agents, various levels, but mostly at the level of the agents, but also some managers, etc. And we did repeated interviews with these people over the span of 8 years. And we did hundreds of hours of work in the companies in terms of sitting in on training sessions, interviews, and of course, we met people outside work in the places that they wanted to meet us, including their homes, but also in malls and other places. We barged calls with agents on the floor. So we actually listened in on calls that agents were making to customers and saw how they were interacting with customers. We interviewed managers, we interviewed HR people within these companies. And of course, we spoke to not just the agents themselves, but their spouses, family members, children, etc. So this is very long-term, immersive field work, a lot of rich qualitative data that comes out of this. And that's the basis for many of the conclusions that we make, right? So we are not doing rapid surveys. We are basically talking to people over time, figuring out how have they changed? How have their aspirations changed over time? How have their interests changed? Like what kinds of things are they now thinking of? How have their horizons changed? So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to get at. These are elusive, difficult to get at changes, but they're very important changes that happen in people's lives that we simply cannot see a way to do outside of the kind of deep, interpretive, long-term fieldwork that we did. Okay, so let me begin by the impact of COVID on BPOs, because obviously this is an issue that is foremost in everybody's minds. So I'll go through this very quickly because many of you may already know about this. After the lockdown was announced, there was one executive at a BPO told us that there were technology issues and there were security issues. Technology issues had to do with how to set up the workers, at home, etc., and that they solved pretty quickly. But the security issues were much harder because companies who hired BPOs, so companies who were basically giving their business to BPOs, American and British and Australian firms, some of them, and especially European firms, were very concerned about security when workers were working from home. Okay. And one of the big problems, of course, of COVID was that all business continuity plans depended on the fact that one area could be hit by, um, a hurricane or an earthquake, or so they were prepared for that. But what they were not prepared for was that all geographies would be simultaneously hit by the fact that governments shut down different in different countries. So the lockdown in India coincided with the lockdown in the Philippines. That meant that the vast majority of BPO workers were basically suddenly not allowed to come into their offices, right? So this had a huge impact, and it was unanticipated, even with the business continuity plans, and it was a big issue. So the problems that were encountered both in India and the Philippines, where the majority of workers are, is that, of course, problems of infrastructure. People didn't have laptops, they didn't have desktop computers, the electricity went on and off, broadband internet was hard to get and of dubious quality. Then there were issues of space because most of the workers that, for example, we worked with lived in extremely congested surroundings. If they were living at home, the homes were small. There was very little privacy. If they were living in what were called basically youth, they were like hostels or PG accommodations. They were crammed like 20 to a room, and there was absolutely no privacy. And of course, the other big problem was of data, how to secure the data that people were using, because in the workspace, in many call centers that we observed, workers were not allowed to take in their phones because they could take screenshots or whatever. They were not allowed to even take in paper and pencil into the workspace. So there was nothing in which they could record credit card numbers or social security number or any, information that was sensitive. But when they were working from home, the big question was, of course, how do you control that, right? Um, there were some unexpected benefits as well. Commute time, basically workers saved commute time. They, a lot of them spend a large portion of their working day traveling to the work site, as much as 2 hours each way. And especially in cities like Bangalore, where traffic is terrible, if you come from the other side of town to your work site, you basically have to spend a large chunk of your working day just commuting. So I think it was surprising to a lot of companies that productivity remained relatively high. They didn't experience a lot of loss of productivity. And of course, it was great for the workers in terms of work-life balance. They could be in their homes, they could look after kids or older adults in the home and then come back and do their work, etc. So there was much more, the workers were able to be present for other family members much more. So there was some benefits as well. Um, so work from home also um, actually had opportunities that opened up rather than just problems for the future of the industry. And one of the opportunities that's opened up is that they now see that they can use work from home to hire part-time workers. Um, this consists mostly of women and retired people who don't want to work full-time, who don't have the ability to work full-time and be responsible for, raising the kids or doing the housework or whatever. Um, and it's also made it possible for companies to now hire people who live in second and third tier cities, even large villages, who are perfectly qualified to work in a call center, but who would not want to move to a large metropolitan center to be able to work there. And it's made it possible for them to hire people, uh, like companies to hire people for sales or whatever, uh, as the most qualified people they can find, rather than people who will be, say, in the northern zone or the southern zone or whatever. So they just are, it made them much more flexible in terms of increasing the pool of workers and where the workers are located. However, after the work from home model was, after the initial period, and people successfully were moved to work from home, in the middle of June, from the middle of June, cybersecurity concerns went up because phishing attacks and malware suddenly went up. So, of course, the people who do this kind of cyber criminals also became aware that this was an opportunity for them. And so they started doing this much more intensively, trying to get to some of this data that they wanted, that they could steal and then sell. So in order to combat this, companies moved to cloud-based security, having virtual private networks, encrypted disks. They disabled USB ports on machines that they gave the employees. And they also instituted systems where they were using both keystrokes and random camera, putting the cameras on and off on laptops to monitor what employees were doing. Right. So there was a various ways in which surveillance, which in the office is easily practiced because they have everything in place. They try to replicate some of that in work from home. Work from home, of course, did not solve the problem that a lot of BPO employees have of working at night, because working at night is a kind of social death. They're out of sync with their families. They are sleeping when their families are awake, and they are awake when their families are asleep. Now, employees still have to work at night from home, but they have lost something else. They have lost the social life that they have at the workplace. So when they go to work at the office, they have other people that they're constantly interacting with. They have social relationships, they have friendships, etc. And sometimes those are the only friendships they have because they're not awake during the day when their other friends are awake. And now work from home has actually made it worse in some ways because they have lost that. Also, people who live alone, work from home has been extremely hard on them, and there's been a vast increase in mental health problems, both among software workers and BPO workers. Okay, so where does this? How did the pandemic affect how companies are thinking about their futures? So one thing became clear with the pandemic was that companies that had already invested heavily in artificial intelligence and machine learning and other things like chatbots, etc., they experienced fewer disruptions than companies that were entirely reliant on call center workers, right? So for example, one of the CEOs of a company 24/7 AI, PV Kannan, in an article, he talked about how uh, that emphasizing the importance of digital channels and automation was central to companies in this pandemic to improve communication with customers, and how companies that had gone further along that path actually handled the pandemic much better than companies who had not done so. Okay, so I will move faster now. As you know, the government of India made regulatory changes to OSPs, and in the future, more companies are planning to have employees work from home. Okay, I will leave that. Okay, so now let me just talk about the future of BPO workers themselves. For a lot of these workers, as I told you, the future is tremendously important because they're very young and they see the future as being open, and they say, well, will I still be working at the BPO when I'm married and when I have children? Those are the two big questions, both for men and for women, about the job. And of course, the physical aspects of the job. It's a very difficult job physically. And that's why one of the chapters in our book is about the missed period. It's about women who miss their periods because of the toll that working at night takes on the body and disrupts the hormonal cycles. Um, and of course, the future is a big aspect of the BPO industry because a lot of critics see it as an industry in which people have no future. It doesn't leave workers trained for anything else. That's like a very regular criticism that you hear of it. But of course, the agents that we spoke to who work in BPOs didn't see it that way. They had a very different idea of their futures. In the short term, most of them were focused on growth within the industry. So growth and learnings were the two most important aspects or topics that we heard from agents about. Um, they thought that they could learn a range of soft skills that would serve them very well later on after they left the industry. And in the short term, most of them expected to rise in the organization, which was a statistical impossibility, of course, but that's what they believed. Um, and in the long term, most agents felt that they would start their own business. They were very entrepreneurial. They all felt they could start their own businesses. The businesses were a range of things that they thought about, everything from retail to restaurants to sales. Um, but one of the most important things we want to emphasize is that the futures that they saw themselves as participating in were profoundly shaped by their desires outside work, by their relationships with their families, with their spouses, what they thought their responsibilities were, their obligations were to the rest of their family, profoundly shaped what they thought they might end up doing after call center work. Okay, now let me talk about the industry itself, and I'm keeping an eye on the time here. Um, so the what happens with the future of the industry itself? So already and one of the reasons we stopped our research in 2016 is we felt we'd come to an inflection point in the industry. It was moving in the direction of automation, and to implement that automation, people were hiring, BPOs were hiring people who had skills that were completely different from the kinds of skills that they had been hiring people for earlier, right? So who would help them automate, who would help them with computer kind of work. So a lot of large companies that had both, like Wipro, that have both a BPO and the computer arm, those two sides were coming closer together. And so the whole industry is changing in a very important way. And this trend will accelerate after COVID. And AI, predictive analytics, and big data are already being used. And I can say a little bit more about that when we in Q&A if people want to know. And one of the ways in which these things are being used is that that customers are being taken from websites to apps to chatting to chats and telephones to calls, depending on what their problems are, what the issues are. So when you start surfing, for example, on a website of a major retail company, you might see a balloon pop up asking, may I help you through a chat? And the reason that it pops up is that you've spent too long looking. And so they know that the longer you spend on the website looking for what you want to find, the less likely you are to buy and the more frustrated you're likely to get. So the balloon pops up, but it's because the website is tracking how long you've spent. And the idea is that the agent can help you get to what you want to buy faster. And so then they introduce agents. So there's a kind of seamless integration between the website and the introduction of an agent to you. As one CEO told us, if someone calls us, we should already know from their phone number what are the 3 most likely questions they're going to ask. It's also clear that wage differentials and labor arbitrage will lose its value over time. And I can say a little bit more about the last point about what was the future that the industry saw in 2009 at the conference, NASSCOM conference that I attended, but I'll just go over that if somebody has a question. Okay, so now I come to the last part, which is about the future of global capitalism. And of course, offshoring has been a big political issue. It was a bigger political issue in 2009 when we started our research than it is now. And there's a distinction between outsourcing and offshoring. And what we see with BPOs is offshore outsourcing. Outsourcing is completely the norm for most companies. But offshoring, combining offshoring with outsourcing is what's distinctive about some of the manufacturing, but also about some of the service industries like BPOs that have come up now. Okay, one of the, of course, big advantages of coming to India was the scale of operations. You could get 4,000, 5,000 employees in one building. It was a very different matter than what you can do in the global north. Okay, so the future of affective capitalism, the primary purpose of call centers, of course, is to keep customers happy and retain customer loyalty. And basically call centers moved from a metric by which they were being paid, which is how many minutes do you spend per call, to the metric that is now commonly used is customer satisfaction surveys. And so they ask customers, how satisfied are you with the service? And that's why at the end of many calls, the agent will ask you, are you satisfied with what we've told you, or do you need something else, right? So they want to make sure that you leave happy, you leave the call happy. And a lot of what the agent does is manage your emotions. So if you are frustrated or angry with the company, they want to be able, a skilled agent will bring you around to feeling that the company is really looking after you, it has your best interests at heart, and so forth. So that is the real work. It's like psychological work. They're like mini sessions with a psychologist. And of course, one of the big issues with BPOs is the relationship between the fact that its care work is being done by people in the global south, for people in the global north. And the question is this reiterating or just repeating colonial logics? And we have an argument about that, which says that it's re-articulating rather than repeating it. And I can talk more about that in Q&A. Okay, so I'm coming to the end, Arvind. Global capitalism has, one of the assumptions of development theory is that there'll be a convergence between incomes and living standards between people in the global south and people in the global north. And an argument that is often made on the contrary side or the opposite side is that actually it is not reducing the gap between the global south and global north. The convergence model is not working. It's actually increasing differences. And there's a kind of back and forth between people who believe one version of the story versus another. And the problem with that argument is that the basis of the argument is wrong, is what we are trying to say. So we are trying to say that we have to think about global capitalism outside the spatial logic of the nation state, right? That we can't just talk about capitalism as being organized along the logics of nation states. It's not about global north versus global south, but within each of those areas, within each geography, there are people who are becoming much more prosperous. They are the growth of billionaires all over the world, in China, India, US. And there's also the growth of increasing precarity, gig work, poverty, etc., within those very geographies, right? So what is happening is that inequality is increasing in the global north, inequality is increasing in the global south, and it's not just between global north and global south. And by using that logic of global north and global south, first world countries and third world countries, we are actually not looking at the right places for what's really happening with global capitalism. So the BPOs, for example, have enabled a small group of people to become middle class, to rise up the class ladder. But it also has, the industry has not helped the majority of working people who don't have English skills, who don't have the ability to interact with customers in the global north, who work in the informal sector, whose jobs are precarious, who we saw in the pandemic. We saw an extreme version of this with the migration that happened. So we are getting the growth of a middle class in India, but not all boats are rising. And that is true in the global north as well. And that's something we have to keep in mind and try to understand as we go forward. So the questions that I leave you with are what implications does affective capitalism have for the growth of prosperity and inequality? Is this new iteration of capitalism going to increase inequalities? Is it going to increase precarity? And how is this different from the stories of capitalism that we have that are either based on foraging, extractive industries, industrial agriculture, manufacturing, and other service industries that are not so heavily dependent on affect? Okay. And part of our argument in the book is that the labor process in affective industries is fundamentally different, and what it is producing, the output is different. So I'll stop there and I'll take questions and comments.
Okay, thank you. Let me start a discussion by asking you kind of three questions. One is, you didn't say much about Philippines. Is there a difference in the way customers see a BPO worker on the line? I guess, from India versus the Philippines. Did you ever study, or you must have read, the perception from the other side, from the person's calling? That's one. Coming to the second question is also kind of general, right? From what you said, one of the skills which is actually learned or honed, perhaps, is how to deal with people, right? I mean, you talked about emotions, but services are all about personal interaction. I mean, most of them. I mean, you already said that doctors, there's a heavy component of technical, but for example, hotels or restaurants, the technical is only one time, but the emotional is every day for the rest of your life. So there is a skill learned, which can be used in other places. I mean, it would suggest to me, I don't know, that there's no need to be pessimistic, right? And the third question is that really, again, there are two, you at the end, you mentioned it yourself, but there are two kind of migrations. There's a migration which happened to the urban home, and from there the daily commute. I would think for majority of people, because 70% are still rural. So, and the temporary problem was of people living home or in an urban home. They are alone because they probably came from a village. If you can go back to the village, all those problems are solved. So I would see a big transformation, possibility of increase in happiness generally, right? I mean, especially in India. I don't know about
Yeah.
Philippines, where just living with your family takes half the problem out of the picture, so to say. Okay, so you may like to comment, and then we will pick up questions. Charan will tell me, I guess. But go ahead. Why don't you kind
Sure,
of start
sure.
that? And
Yeah. Thank you for those questions. Yeah. So, when in fact, as a customer, you are connected to somebody, you don't actually know where they are. And most of the companies that we worked with had offices in multiple locations and workers in multiple locations. So a large BPO will have typically 10 or 12 locations around the world in which they have BPO workers. And if I, as a customer, call, I don't know where I'll be connected to because they'll just route it to whichever place has the most availability of workers at that moment and where the call volumes are not as high. Um, and so for most customers, they don't really find out, except from perhaps reading if you're very good at accents and can figure out where people
yeah,
are coming from. But like I can speak for America. I mean, people in the US are generally ignorant of world geography, and they
yeah,
they have no idea where people are
mm,
calling from. so so only, I mean, I, of course, because I've been working on this topic, I know when
yeah,
I'm talking to someone in the Philippines. But Philippines is where a lot of the call work has now migrated to the Philippines. The live customer interaction. Uh, in India, there's been a move to chat and other modalities. Um, Now, in terms of skills that people learn in the industry, of course, they learn soft skills. And if you ask the workers themselves, what are you going to do? They say, you don't know how much I've learned. I've learned, I can now interact with bankers, I can interact with people,
mhm,
all over the world, and I'm confident in doing that. And so I feel that I can succeed in anything that I start, any business that I start. Soft skills are the most important aspects of it. And so, and so basically what they say is that, okay, so
okay,
what they say is that those skills are the ones that will help them after they stop working, that
yeah,
they themselves feel that they have changed as a result of that work. And I mean, I can report to you what we observed, and which was that they did indeed change. They didn't change remarkably in the course of the work itself. And I can give you some anecdotes about that. um, and in terms of, yes, where people can work from, it is, I think a lot of companies are thinking that if we can get people to work from their native place, from their homes, then in fact we will be able to get a huge new pool of workers who will be happier because they will be still
yeah,
connected to their location. So
yeah.
they see this as a big boon for themselves, for the
Mm.
industry, but also for the workers, because they feel that the quality of life for the workers will improve.
Yeah, okay. So that confirmed. Okay, Charan, are you seeing some questions here or?
Of questions, and I think they are in the audience. Can I request them to ask their question themselves? And they can follow the sequence. We can start with Debalina, then Sayantani Saswati, and Ishani Vajpayee. And Professor Gupta, you can decide to take all the questions and then answer them as you prefer. So can we request Debalina First, then Saintani Saraswati, and then Ishani Vajpayee, please. And the second round, or we could even ask Professor Jaina to ask his question. So four questions in the first round.
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Gupta.
Hi.
I was interested to know, like you said, there was an extensive field study for years based in Bangalore with different companies you have worked. You have worked with the which are engaged in outsourcing, offshoring activities. So, how do you make the selection? How to avoid the biases and how do you select the participants? That will be interesting to know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. The next, so I'm taking 3 or 4 questions at a time. And
Uh, Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your talk. Your talk was really interesting, and I think I've noticed similar patterns in the sector of organized retail, where
mhm,
the sales workers, especially, uh, uh, portray few cases of commodification of emotion, and because of COVID, they also faced a lot of consequences, and
mhm,
uh, because uh, so now, since a lot of people are not going to the malls for shopping or these organized retails, they don't interact, they are standing alone. Earlier, they also have learned the soft skills, like you pointed out.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah, I think there are few similarities. So, I'm just sharing my observations. So I look forward
Yeah,
to your comment on this.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you presentation, sir. I have a question that do you think the meaning of professionalism has changed due to due to the impacts of COVID-19 in the BPO sector?
Mm, okay, good question. Yeah. One more.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your very nice presentations. This is Pavitra here. So I have 2, 3 questions to you because your study is very interesting. So first, I would like to know what are the qualitative techniques you have used to know like the future that impact that what is the impact of that COVID-19 future impact on BPO. And when we're talking about the affective capitalism, so what I think that inequalities keep on increasing. So how you can keep on check on that, and what is the biggest positive impact of BPO what is the biggest impact of COVID-19 on BPO sectors? If you can highlight that, I'll be very obliged. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions. Okay, so let me just talk about how we selected participants. So our first way of kind of approaching people was that we did some interviews and focus groups at people's work sites. So we started with the companies, we interviewed people there, and then we moved, once we identified and made contact with people, we moved our interaction outside. So we didn't normally work with people interact with those people at the work site itself, but talk to them outside for various reasons. One was that they felt freer to talk to us. They were more they were more open about their experiences, especially if they had negative or critical things to say. Also, they had more time because, of course, when they're working, the time is very strictly monitored. And then we stratified the sample according to things that we were interested in looking at. So we were interested in looking at are there differences across gender, differences across age? Does it make a difference if someone is from a small town versus someone from the city itself? If someone is a migrant versus someone who lives in the city itself. So there were various things that we were interested in that we thought might show us differences amongst the workers. And that was the reason, that's how we selected the group for finally the group that we worked with. Also, a lot of it was dependent on who wanted to speak to us. So we, in ethnographic work, that's always the case, that you have to depend on some people don't want to talk to you, even though you think they might be perfect candidates for your study. But we always find enough people and who are along a range of variables that we want to stratify on, that it was not a problem, especially because we could add people as we went along and so forth. So we felt that the main issue was we got to know people well. They were able to confide in us. They were able to talk to us in a way that would not have been possible in a one-off interview, or even interviewing them once every few years or something. So we really got to know people, and that's the method of anthropology or participant observation. We spent one full year in 2009, and then every subsequent summer doing this research. So we got to know people really well over the course of 8 years. Yeah, so Sayanthini's observations about the retail sector. I mean, the one big difference between the retail sector and the BPOs is that, people who work in the retail sector are constrained in what they can do long distance, right? They have to be at the work site, etc. And one of the big things that happened with BPOs was exactly the work from home movement, the issue, which the successful transitioning to work from home enabled people to be able to still do their jobs and be paid for them and so forth, in a way that that retail sector workers were unable to do. They had to show up to work. They were more exposed to COVID. They had to take greater risks to get to work, etc. So I think that's would be one of the differences. But you're absolutely right about many of the other things being similar. Then in Ishani's question about has the meaning of professionalism changed during COVID? So I don't have interviews with my workers during COVID because obviously I've not been able to travel. And I haven't had very intensive conversations with people on the phone or whatever. So I can't tell you for sure how this has changed. And I would, I would say that's an open question. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to kind of make a wild stab at it. So I'll basically leave it there. And then Pavitra, your questions about the qualitative techniques that we use, I think I've answered some of them. Um, um, about inequality and the relationship to affective capitalism. I think that's an open question. I think a lot of people feel that gig work, which affective capitalism has opened up to, like with the controversies of Uber and things like that, that gig work has actually is enabling greater inequality. Because it basically makes work itself less stable, um, less predictable, and incomes become more highly variable. And so this is not for many people necessarily a good thing. That the growth of affective capitalism is not necessarily going to lead to lower inequality. But that's something that we have to wait and see how that works out and in what directions it goes. It's still an open question, I think, in many ways, whether affective capitalism more than other forms of capitalism creates these inequalities. In short, we don't know an answer to that. We don't have an answer to that, and I can't tell you for sure one way or the other. Now, in terms of, whether BPOs are good or not, I mean, that's a question that as as anthropologists and sociologists, we generally avoid. People always used to ask me when I did my work on the Green Revolution, whether the Green Revolution was good for India. And I would say, well, I can tell you what the effects are, and you decide whether it's good or not. But I can tell you what the effects are of the BPOs. They hired a lot of people who would otherwise be unemployed, people with, basically 12th grade degree, who might otherwise be unemployed. It's enabled a lot of people who get these jobs to become middle class. Their families have become middle class. There's been upward mobility. Definitely, it's one of the few sectors in India where employment and mobility have created opportunities for people. And of course, we talk also in the book about all the negative things about, the impact it has on your physical health, the impact it has on your social health, and so forth. So both those things exist at the same time. Whether it's good or not is, I think, for people to decide, on their own. And what we do in the book is we make it clear what those different aspects are.
There are a few more questions. One is
Yes,
from
please.
Hemant Yadav and one from Krishnanand Tripathi.
Professor Gupta, I just wanted to ask you whether this COVID lockdowns in USA and European countries, whether they have led to shifting of jobs to countries like India, and what was the past experience during the last 8-9 months, and what will be the trend in future, because there are going to be more lockdowns with the new strain.
Yes. Should I take the second question as well?
Yeah.
Hemant?
These two questions.
Okay. So I'll just take it from the chat, Hemant's question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So, on this question about Krishnanand, about whether COVID has led to jobs being further offshored, I think there have been some trends in both directions. So on the one hand, clearly because customer interaction became more important, companies had to actually increase the scale because as you know, there were entire industries that were disrupted by COVID, right? The hotel industry, the travel industry. I mean, there were entire industries that were completely disrupted by this. And as a result of that, a lot of customers were calling with questions. What do I do with my reservation? Am I going to get a refund, et cetera, et cetera? And because of this, the need for having more agents and having more people to be able to answer the queries has increased. Also, one of the constraints in India has always been that BPOs were unable to hire enough people with strong enough English language skills to service customers in the global north. And with the pandemic and work from home, the pool of workers has increased, and this has made it easier for the companies to hire more people. And so I think that these are all trends that go in one direction. On the other side is a trend in which companies are saying, well, because, for example, in Europe, because of data safety laws, the European data safety laws, it's a lot of companies are moving these operations back to Europe because they can't risk data security issues by having people work from home in the Philippines and in India. So they've been countervailing trends. I'm not sure which direction this will go in eventually, but in general, the trend has been for more and more service industries to move to to move to the global south, and especially the affective industries have moved more and more to the global south. So I don't see anything about COVID as fundamentally changing that. I can see some patterns of acceleration and some patterns of deceleration, but I don't think it's going to fundamentally alter that trend. And then, okay, let me get to the Hemant's question about. So Hemant's question is about how AI and machine learning concepts are being implemented. And the comment is that it does not seem far that BPOs or service sectors would greatly be impacted by this. So Hemant, you may know more about this than I do, but my feeling was that in fact it will affect BPO workers, partly because as AI chatbots etc. get smarter and as they improve in quality, it actually eliminates the need for call center workers, because you can see that you can answer most of your questions on the website. And if you call today, because of the shortage of workers, etc., they direct you to the website. So the more you use the website, the smarter the chatbot grows, because the more questions it faces, the more it learns. So self-learning AI tools are indeed going to have an impact on the industry. The way in which this has had an impact on the industry currently is that when an agent is talking to you on the phone, they have a whole list of suggestions and comments from the and the analytics that are telling them what to say to you as a customer. So when the agent is looking at his or her screen, he is actually getting information about your demographic, about how much you spend, about what you're most likely to buy, and he's actually getting suggestions on things to upsell to you. So it's already changed the nature of the job of agents. Companies that have heavily invested in this are doing things differently. The industry itself is changing completely. It's no longer just calling up people on the telephone, but it's being deeply informed by big data and analytics, and that's going to accelerate in the future. Okay, so there was a question about from Ishani. Ishani, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, sir. It is a question. I just want to know what were the research gaps and limitations you noticed during your period of ethnography?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, it's very important to not pretend that you have the answers to every question that arises in your research area. And for us, you know, for example, we worked only in Bangalore. We did not do comparative work in the Philippines. We didn't do comparative work in Delhi and so forth, where other major call centers are located. And of course, if we had done that, we would find different things. For example, we know that the gender mix is different in North India than it is in South India. In the call centers in Delhi, in the National Capital Region, it's 70% male. In where we were working, it was closer to 50% male. So that's a huge difference. Um, and I'm sure the work environment is different, the work culture is different. So there were things that we obviously couldn't pick up on because we didn't do work in different locations. Um, in terms of the kinds of companies we were looking at, we did not look at companies that were domestic call centers. So these were all companies that catered to foreign clients, but they varied in size and sophistication. The largest of our companies had 40,000 workers in 12 different locations around the world. The smallest one was just one company in Bangalore, which had only 1,000 agents, right? So there was a big difference between the. So we stratified our companies by size because we had thought we would see some differences, and we did see some differences, but we didn't stratify by looking at companies that were doing domestic work, Ola for Ola cabs or Indian Railways or whatever. We didn't look at those. So we didn't get at, I think, the lower end of the call center business. And there were definitely differences we would find in the class background, but also the training of agents in those than in the companies that we worked with. So yeah, I mean, there are multiple places where I could point to where the limitations are of our research. And so in our writing, what we want to do is make clear this is what we found from what we studied, but we can't tell you about these other things. And as long as we are clear about that and we are honest about that, then you know that the claims that we are making are not claims that cannot be supported by the evidence we have. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Actually, I'm going to start my ethnography in upcoming few months, probably. So, and especially my focus is on IT sector.
Oh,
So
great.
that's why. Yes, sir.
Excellent. Good luck with that.
Thank you, sir.
So are there any other questions, or are we at the end of our time, Arvind? You're muted.
Charan, did you see any other questions?
Yeah, I think we have exceeded our time, and no, I also had a question, but I think we are beyond the time limit. It's nearing 10 o'clock here. But I would like to say, Professor Gupta, it was an excellent presentation, and we learned a lot from your presentation. My question was that you have done the surveys in Bangalore, but there are these BPOs in other parts of the country also. Are you planning to extend your study to other parts of the country?
Yeah, I just spoke about that, Charan, while you were off screen for a while. But basically, the answer is no. We did not. We have not worked in other parts of the country, and we are not planning to do that in the short run, because now I became very much interested in what I see as a huge move in both this industry, but also in other industries towards data analytics and AI, and that's probably going to be the place where I'm going to be doing my next field work. Is that in that space?
All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
So I'm Dr. Vermani. You're still mute. Yeah.
No, no. I was saying that I think we can close this topic. I was just wondering if there are any interesting bullet type of points from your corruption studies which can stimulate our,
You know,
our
I
interest.
got
But it's okay. I mean, it's just yeah.
no, if you agree, Professor Gupta, if you agree, can we have you once again on that study?
Of course, I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I had a glimpse of that study in my interaction with you both at Stanford and then at UCLA, and I know how powerful that study is. And I would really like you to come and spend one more session with us on that study. It's totally your convenience.
Of
Some,
course.
sometimes February, if it is okay, or March. So there's continuity also, but we would like to know about your that study in length. By the way, sir, I had a chance to glance through that work of his and interact with him. I think, Professor Gupta, you started that study when you were in Stanford.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you made a presentation there where I was there at that time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know how beautiful that study is. So I think,
Thank
and
you.
he gave a complete, I think it was a 90-minute presentation, 90-minute session where he spoke on that study, and that was very powerful. So can we then request you and book you for that sometimes in the first week of March?
I will work on a date,
We'll work.
but I would, yeah, that would
Yeah,
be great.
that's
I'll
great.
be very happy.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Charan. Thank you, Professor Gupta. Okay. Bye.
So
Thank you.
I must thank everybody on a Friday late evening. We are doing it. Must thank Professor Gupta who joined us on a Friday morning, so early in the morning from Los Angeles. Very kind of him to have agreed to. There's an announcement to make. This recording of today's presentation will be available by noon tomorrow on our website. We are going to, because this presentation is so relevant and so important, the book is yet not out. So we have a precursor to what the research is all about. We are going to place it on Twitter also. And I'll send the Twitter handle to both Professor and Dr. Virmani, the way they want to then extend it. So I must thank everybody for this participation. Next week, we continue with our discussion on the union budget. So the EGROW team is going to be making a presentation along with PhD Chambers of Commerce. There'll be a little change in the time. Today was 8:30 to 9:30. Our standard time is 5:30 to 6:30. But next week, we are doing from 4 to 6. So the flyers and everything will be available to everyone. They'll be on our website. The passwords will be there. We invite you on our journey on the union budget that is going to be presented in the parliament on February 1. So, with that, all the best. Have a great weekend. Look forward to meeting all of you next week. Thank you.
Thank
Good.
you.